So if you go and look up probably the most famous photograph of the Beat generation.
Oh, the 1961 shot, right, at the Hotel Muneria?
Yeah, exactly, in Tangier, Morocco. So you look at this picture and you see William S. Burroughs standing there. You've got Allen Ginsberg, Gregory Corso, like all these massive counterculture icons. But the actual most important rebel of that entire era is nowhere to be found in the photo.
Right, which is just, I mean, it's so poetic because he's missing for a very literal reason.
He's the one holding the camera.
Exactly. He is literally capturing this legendary literary scene for posterity, but he just remains totally elusive. He was like the ultimate outsider in a movement that was literally defined by being outsiders.
Totally. And that's exactly what we're getting into today. Welcome to today's deep dive. We are pulling from this really fascinating 2026 academic article out of the Confluence Journal of Multidisciplinary Studies.
Right, by Alan Hibbard.
Yeah, it's called Brion Gysin Beat Outsider in Morocco. And our mission today is really to explore this guy who deeply influenced the most famous writers of the 20th century, but somehow, completely avoided the mainstream spotlight himself.
Well, because we live in a world that constantly tells you to, like, pick a lane, right? Find your niche, build your personal brand. And Brion Gysin was a guy who absolutely refused to do any of that.
He just would not play the game.
No. And this deep dive is really an exploration of the cost of that, the heavy cost of absolute creative freedom. Because, when you walk through a museum, there is this comforting expectation of order. Every artist gets their own neatly labeled room.
Right.
You know what you're looking at. But Gysin preferred to, break down the walls and just totally rearrange the exhibits.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because if we want to understand how someone becomes that relentlessly unclassifiable, we really have to look at his beginnings. I mean, they were incredibly unmoored.
Oh, absolutely.
He wasn't just bouncing between artistic mediums later in life.
Yeah.
He was bouncing across the globe literally from day one.
Mm-hmm.
So he was born in England in 1916 to Canadian parents.
Right.
And then just 8 months later, his father dies in the Battle of the Somme.
Yeah, which is a tragic start. So his mother ends up moving him to the backwaters of Alberta, Canada. And he actually spends part of his childhood living on reservations alongside Indigenous people.
Which is wild.
It is. It's a profound exposure to a completely different way of viewing the world at such a formative age.
And then he doesn't stay there. He gets shipped back across the Atlantic to a boarding school in England.
Naturally.
Right.
Yeah.
Then he spends the 1930s just wandering around France.
Mm-hmm.
World War II breaks out, so he takes refuge in New York. And he finally lands in Tangier in 1950.
Just because the author Paul Bowles invited it, right?
Yeah, literally just on an invitation. So he never really had a fixed home.
And, that lack of a fixed country translates directly into this deeply fractured personality. Because the historical record we're pulling from today, it presents this staggering list of contradictions about who he actually was.
It really does.
I mean, William S. Burroughs, who is arguably one of the most cynical, hard-to-please writers ever, he famously called Gysin the only man he ever respected.
Wow.
Yeah. And many sources describe him as this incredibly inspiring mentor, like a really generous friend and a charming storyteller.
And we do have to look at the whole picture here. The article also cites some incredibly dark descriptions of him.
Right, yeah.
And just to be clear, for everyone listening, we are just impartially reporting exactly what the source text provides here. We aren't taking a side.
Of course.
But the text notes he was described by some people as a bitter, paranoid, right-wing misogynist.
Yeah.
One source bluntly calls him a, quote, bad human being, unquote, who genuinely believed man was a bad animal. He's described as being always on the financial hustle, totally disloyal to the people who supported him.
It's jarring to read.
It is. I have a really hard time reconciling this. Like, how does someone become universally respected by these counterculture icons who are all about liberation, but simultaneously get documented as this cynical misanthrope? Was he just a chameleon?
Well, the source material doesn't really try to neatly reconcile it because, honestly, maybe it just can't be reconciled. But what's fascinating here is think about what it actually takes to live a life of total rebellion.
Okay.
If your entire philosophy is built on destroying established structures and, rejecting all societal norms, you aren't going to have a tidy, polite moral compass.
Right. You're not going to be a people pleaser.
Exactly. His absolute refusal to conform made him a genius to his fellow artists, but it also made him a deeply toxic figure to other people. Radical freedom isn't always pretty.
That makes a lot of sense.
He alienated people across the board because he refused to conform to the mainstream, sure, but he also refused to conform to the expectations of the counterculture.
He was just an outsider to the outsiders.
Precise.
So you have this deeply fractured guy, just full of this unmoored, chaotic energy, refusing to fit in anywhere. Where do you even put that kind of jagged energy? You can't just be a full-time contrarian. You need an outlet. And for Gysin, his first real serious outlet was visual art. He started as a painter.
But even in painting, he runs face first into another really rigid system of control.
Which is so ironic.
It is. So in 1935, when Gysin was just 19 years old, he gets invited to participate in this major surrealist exhibition in Paris.
19 is so young for that.
Incredibly young. And keep in mind, surrealism was supposedly all about unlocking the subconscious, right? Rejecting logic. It should have been the perfect fit for him.
Yeah, a match made in heaven.
But his paintings were abruptly removed from the show right before it opened.
And the source notes, this was at the direct order of André Breton, right? The founder of surrealism.
Yes, which is a really crucial detail. Breton wasn't just an artist. He was basically notorious for acting like the dictator of the subconscious.
Yeah.
He demanded strict adherence to his specific rules for making art. So getting kicked out of a major exhibition at 19 by the ultimate artistic gatekeeper.
That is a massive slight.
Huge. And what's fascinating here is how that single rejection shaped his entire trajectory. He basically never forgave Breton.
I mean, I wouldn't either.
Right. It essentially poisoned his relationship with any formal art movements. It pushed him to just blur the lines between forms, ensuring that no one could ever put his work in a box and judge it by their rules again.
He didn't stop painting, though,
Yeah.
which is good. The article mentions these really beautiful sort of abstract Moroccan landscapes he did later, like Jama Alfina and Night in Marrakech.
Yeah.
But his absolute masterpiece, the one that really stands out, is this piece called Calligraphy of Fire.
Oh, that piece is incredible.
And the context of it is just wild. He painted it near the very end of his life. He's suffering from severe emphysema, literally physically tethered to an oxygen tank, just so he can breathe. And he produces this massive, swirling, dynamic canvas. He wrote that a painting must be, quote, all paint and all spirit. It had to demand a spiritual dimension.
And that relentless pursuit of that spiritual dimension is exactly what drove him to transition from traditional landscapes into calligraphy.
Okay, right.
Because living in Morocco, he was constantly surrounded by Arabic script. And even though he didn't really read the language fluently, the visual impact of it fundamentally changed how he viewed the line between an image and a word.
So he starts creating these really elaborate visual texts.
Yes.
And if you look at them, they look exactly like flowing, highly complex calligraphy. They have all that expressive energy, the loops, the rhythm of real writing, but they don't contain any actual legible words.
Exactly. They exist in this brilliant liminal space between mediums. He's making art that evokes the profound feeling of reading a sacred text without ever locking the viewer into a specific literal message.
You know what it reminds me of? It's like looking at a massive chalkboard covered in a really complex mathematical equation.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
Right. Or like a dense piece of sheet music.
Yeah.
If you don't know how to read math or music, you obviously can't decipher the literal meaning.
Sure.
But you can feel the rhythm of it. You can see the structure. You instinctively know there's an intent and some deeper truth behind all those symbols.
Yeah.
That's what Gysin's calligraphy does. It gives you the experience of language entirely freed from the constraints of vocabulary.
That is a highly effective way to visualize it. And, this progression organically forces a totally new conceptual leap for him.
How so?
Well, once you realize that an image can evoke the power of a word without the meaning, you start looking at actual rigid words very differently.
Right, okay.
You start seeing literal sentences as a cage. And if sentences are a cage, well, the next logical step is to destroy them.
Which brings us right back to that legendary literary scene we mentioned earlier. Specifically, the Beat Hotel in Paris, right around 1960 and 1961.
Yes.
This is where Gysin introduces William S. Burroughs to a technique that just completely upends literature, the cut-up method.
The mechanism of the cut-up method is just so aggressive in its simplicity.
It really is.
Gysin laid out a literal recipe for it in this publication called Minutes to Go. He instructs the reader to take a book, literally any book, slice it right down the middle, dice it into sections.
Like cooking.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Then chop in some pages of the Bible, pour on some Madison Avenue advertising prose, shuffle it all together like playing cards, and then, quote, taste it like piping hot alphabet soup.
So you're literally taking scissors to pages of text, mixing the physical scraps of paper around on a table, and then reading the new randomized sentences that form by pure chance.
Right.
But I have to ask, isn't this just shredding paper?
Mhm.
Like, if I take today's newspaper, run it through my paper shredder, and tape it back together with my eyes closed, I haven't written a profound novel. I've just made a huge mess on my desk.
Yeah, it does sound completely absurd.
Does destroying a sentence actually create a deeper meaning? Or is it just like a parlor trick to shock the literary establishment?
It sounds exactly like a parlor trick until you really understand his philosophy on the nature of control.
Okay, lay it on me.
For Gysin and Burroughs, established narratives, like the way sentences are supposed to flow, the way stories are fed to us by the media, by religion, by advertising, those are literal systems of control.
Right.
They dictate exactly how you are allowed to think.
Right.
So by cutting up the words and forcing them into these new, totally random collisions, you disrupt that syntax. You free the words from the people who are trying to control you.
Wow, okay. Think about the algorithms feeding you your news feed or your social media timeline today.
Oh, absolutely.
Those algorithms rely on a highly predictable, engaging syntax to keep you scrolling, keeping you reacting exactly how they want you to.
Yeah.
Gysin was basically suggesting we take a pair of scissors to the algorithm.
Precisely. It is an act of total linguistic rebellion. And he pushed this concept down to a microscopic level with what he called his permutation poems.
Yeah, I want to talk about these.
He didn't just cut up paragraphs. He cut up tiny fundamental phrases. The most famous example is his manipulation of the biblical phrase from the book of Exodus, I am that I am.
Right, which is the original phrase, like the ultimate statement of absolute divine authority. God literally saying, I am that I am.
Right. And according to the source, Gysin created 605 permutations of that simple five-word phrase.
605.
Yeah, he just relentlessly rearranged the order.
And it completely shatters the reality of the sentence. If you just move the punctuation around and swap a word, I am that I am, becomes I am that, am
Yeah.
I?
Yes.
Suddenly, the ultimate statement of divine certainty transforms into this question of profound self-doubt. It's crazy. And he did the same thing with the phrase, kick that habit, man.
Right.
He turns it into, that habit kick, man kick that habit man kick that.
Notice the rhythm when you say that out loud.
It's very punchy.
It takes on this hypnotic, driving beat. It literally has a musicality to it. It just demonstrates how incredibly fragile meaning really is and how easily you can subvert a commanding voice just by shifting the syntax around.
But he doesn't stop with just words on a page, does he?
No, of course not.
He takes this entire cut-up philosophy, this blender concept of mashing disparate realities together to break systems of control, and he scales it up to the size of the entire world. Let's look at how he applied this to the novel format first, and then to global music.
Yeah, so in the 1960s, he wrote a novel called The Process.
Okay.
If his poems were a blender for phrases, this novel is basically a blender for cultures. The protagonist is an African-American man named Ulysses Hansen III, who also adopts the name Hassan Americani.
Right.
And he's just roaming through the Algerian Sahara, carrying this portable U-Her tape recorder, capturing all the chaos around him.
The text describes the novel as a wild fantasia. It features magical elements, like the emerald seal of the Sahara.
Yeah.
It incorporates magic realism, which, in this context, allows Gysin to completely break the rigid logical reality of Western storytelling. You have these absurd characters like a wealthy woman named Maya Stranglebloodhimmer.
What a name.
I know, right? And a character named Hamid, who is actually based on Gysin's real-life Moroccan collaborator, Mohammed Hamri.
And it also contains parodies of modern movements. He specifically parodies Scientology, which he dubs grammatology in the book.
Why Scientology specifically? Like, why focus on that?
Because L. Ron Hubbard created a highly rigid system of control. Gysin viewed modern religious or self-help movements as just another syntax, right? A script telling people exactly how to behave.
Oh, I see.
So he calls his parody grammatology, directly linking the control of a person's soul to the control of grammar and language.
That makes perfect sense. The source text suggests this book could actually be considered a beat novel, comparing it to Jack Kerouac's On the Road, but set in Morocco.
Yeah, definitely.
But here is the real insight. Gysin's novel isn't just a traditional story about chaos. The novel itself functions like that tape recorder the protagonist carries.
Right.
It's a piece of technology meant to record and reflect the absurdity of trying to force neat Western narrative structures onto the vast, totally uncontrollable reality of the Sahara.
It's just a massive intercultural collision right on the page. But, he wasn't content to just write about these collisions. He was engineering them in real life, too.
He was living the cut-up method every single day.
Exactly.
So in 1950, he opened a restaurant and bar in Tangier called the 1001 Nights. But he didn't hire, a standard jazz quartet to entertain all the expats.
No, that would be too normal.
Way too normal. The house band was the master musicians of Jajouka, playing this ancient, hypnotic trance music.
He essentially became a kind of rogue anthropologist for their endangered traditions. And then in 1967, he acts as this unprecedented cultural bridge.
Yeah, this part is wild.
He physically brings Brion Jones, the guitarist for the Rolling Stones, who at this point is at the absolute peak of 1960s British rock fame,
Right.
along with the legendary free jazz musician Ornette Coleman, to hear the master musicians of Jajouka play.
He is essentially acting as a cultural DJ. He's taking a 1,000-year-old Moroccan trance ritual and scratching a 1960s British rock star right over the top of it. He's literally cutting up culture itself.
And this wasn't just like a fun concert outing for him. The ethnomusicologist Philip Schuyler notes that the initial promotion of this ancient music to the Western world was basically a labor of love driven by Brion Gysin and Mohammed Hamri.
Wow.
They deliberately cross-pollinated these incredibly different worlds just to break down the borders of time and geography.
And his writing on these traditions is incredibly visceral, too.
Oh, yeah.
In a 1964 publication called Nawa, he wrote a piece called Pipes of Pan, documenting these pre-Islamic rituals in the Rift Mountains. And the imagery he uses is so intense. And again, we're just reporting what the source says here, but he describes pagan rituals centered around the goat god. He writes about women screaming and birth yodeling, pushing out small boys dressed in white dragon veils.
Yeah.
He describes them dancing in the moonlight, quote, shaking that thing, unquote, while Pan flails them until dawn.
It's ancient, it's wild, it involves gender bending, and it is completely unconcerned with polite Western norms.
Not at all.
He wasn't just observing it as a detached scholar, he was totally mesmerized by this raw, unedited human experience exactly because it defied everything the West tried to categorize.
Which brings us to the ultimate core of what Gysin was trying to achieve with all of this chaos across all these decades.
Right.
His overarching goal, whether he was wielding a paintbrush, a pair of scissors, or a tape recorder, was absolute liberation.
He broke down the borders of countries through his relentless nomadism. He broke down the borders of artistic mediums, moving seamlessly from painting to calligraphy to writing to ethnomusicology. And he broke down cultural borders, forcing the ancient East to collide with the modern West.
But now this is the really sad part. Despite living a life that sounds like the most incredible, chaotic movie you've never seen, there is a deeply tragic twist to his story.
It really is.
Because refusing to pick a lane comes with a heavy cost. Gysin died in Paris in 1986. And despite deeply influencing the most famous writers of his generation, despite hanging out with the Rolling Stones and inventing a literary method that changed how we view language, he died feeling like a failure.
He looked back on his career with profound disappointment. He actually described his own life as, quote, an adventure leading nowhere.
That's rough. There is a heartbreaking quote from his journal near the end of his life. He wrote, "You should hammer one nail all your life, and I didn't do that. I hammered on a lot of nails like a xylophone."
It is a devastatingly honest self-assessment. I mean, he chose to play the xylophone. He bounced from note to note, medium to medium, country to country.
Yeah.
And it resulted in absolute, uncompromising creative freedom. But it cost him the household name legacy of his peers.
He's the guy holding the camera.
Exactly. Ensuring the moment is captured, but never actually getting his face in the history books.
Which takes us right back to that Museum of Legacy we talked about at the very beginning of the deep dive.
Right.
The museum only has room for people who stand still long enough to be categorized.
Yeah.
Gysin refused to stand still.
So, as you navigate your own life, your career, and the things you are passionate about, consider the trade-off.
Yeah.
If you had to choose between the absolute freedom to explore every single facet of your curiosity, even if it meant being entirely forgotten by the masses or restricting yourself to striking one single nail over and over again, just to guarantee you get your own room in the museum, which tool are you picking up?